All right, it says we're live.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Eduarda Schroder, and this is the Chandler Pride Project. Chandler Pride is a newly formed group that I am a co-founder of. Tyler Conway is the other, with the assistance of Nikki Tapia from the City of Chandler and the Diversity Community Relations Office. The purpose of the group is to ultimately provide support for the LGBTQ community. I have been involved in these endeavors since I'm sorry, I need to do something about this other thing that is going on. Okay. So we are, at Chandler Pride, we're at this point really trying to identify supporters, and we know many, and we are in the process of connecting with them, and we are doing a listening tour, and we want to hear from the community about what their concerns are and how they and what they determine to be needs that are not being met. Ultimately, we might actually work to request nicely that some ordinances be changed to provide protections for the LGBT community, in the city. But for now, our goal is to educate, and we are going to be doing a series of interviews uh, for that reason. So there's going to be different topics, and I will not be the only person that will be asking the questions. But today, I have the pleasure of introducing my child, Jude Schroder. Jude is a trans youth, and can you tell us how you identify?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Jude. Eduarda is my mom. She's going to be interviewing me today. I identify as non-binary and transmasculine, and I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I also identify as pansexual. And in general, I think a good word for me is queer, which just usually saves me some time.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because I'm always learning stuff from you or about you. So the first question that I have is, were you born this way?
That's that's a actually kind of a tough question to answer, and I think that it's a big debate amongst the LGBTQ plus community. One of the arguments that historically um, people in the community, especially people who are gay, used in order to advocate for gay liberation and LGBT rights and acceptance and same-sex marriage and everything like that. One of the arguments that we've used in the past is to say, well, we're born this way, right? We can't change this. It's not a choice. And while that was an important stepping stone in like the history of the LGBTQ plus community, I think that it ignores a little bit of nuance. And now that we've come a long way in terms of accepting at least being gay, I think we have, I think, more room to sort of expand upon that. And I don't think that there's a right answer to this question, by the way, but for me, I'm actually not sure how much of my identity or my transness or my queerness was something that I was born with, and how much of it like might have changed throughout time. And I believe that my gender or sexuality is at least somewhat fluid. It can change and move along a spectrum. And I always give myself space in the future to change my identities, how I identify, and where I am along this spectrum. I don't believe that I have to be like on a fixed point in terms of my queerness, my sexual orientation, or my gender identity. So it's tough because I don't think I think the born this way argument sort of ignores the concept that people change throughout their life. That being said, I don't think that this was a choice. I definitely tried to live like a woman. Like I tried to be what I thought society wanted me to be and tried to like pretend that I was cisgender. And I tried to pretend that I was straight for a little bit before that, and it didn't really work out for me. So I don't really think that this is a choice. I think that in order for me to survive and thrive, like throughout my life, I needed to come out and be queer and transgender. But I always give myself the room to change that in the future and to grow with my identities and have those identities change with me.
Okay, so along the lines of the things that you just talked about, can you uh, say something about sexual orientation versus gender identity, and how might a straight person not really like understand any of what that would feel like or be like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can talk about that. I did want to just quickly plug the Chandler Pride YouTube channel. Um, we are starting up a lot of social media accounts for Chandler Pride, which is our new organization in Chandler dedicated to the LGBT community and advocating for it and teaching people about it. So if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel already, and if you haven't followed us on Instagram and all of that stuff, you can follow us on YouTube. Our account name is Chandler Pride, and on Instagram we are Chandler Pride 20. So make sure that you search up those things, and in a second I will try to find the link to the YouTube channel so you can follow it. I'll send it in the chat. But back to your question, I think that gender and sexual orientation are very different, but sometimes straight people get those confused. And while they are related to each other, they are separate things. So sexual orientation is who you're attracted to, and your gender identity is how you feel inside about your gender. So sexual orientation is more about your attraction to other people, and your gender identity is how you feel inside. So they're intertwined, they're related, but they are definitely separate things. And I think that in general, straight and cisgender people don't necessarily think about them a lot. In Western society, we have kind of this concept called heteronormativity. And basically that just means that like straight and cisgender is the default. So it's sort of assumed that everyone is straight or cisgender, and anyone who's not that is deviant or different or othered or in a minority. So if you are straight and cis, because it's sort of assumed or the default, you might not think about sexual orientation or your gender identity a lot, because your gender identity aligns with your assigned sex at birth if you're cisgender. And if you're straight, I mean, compulsory heterosexuality is like pretty much like the reason why we've had to fight for LGBT rights and why it's seen as so different. So it's just like something that you have to, if you want to be an ally, you have to do a lot of like educating yourself and learning in order to understand, because your personal experiences in life wouldn't have really informed you about what it's like to be queer or transgender, for example.
Which is what we're trying to do here, right? Educate.
Exactly.
Okay. I remember pretty much the whole journey, from the parents' perspective. And I know that I was not necessarily privy to some of your thoughts and feelings, because you kept them to yourself. But I know that therapy was a very important part of your journey. I believe in therapy and getting the help that you need. And so I want you to talk a little bit about how it all began, your connection with therapy and how, it has been helpful to you.
Sure. I started going to therapy because I had been having kind of like a gender identity crisis, and I was scared to talk to people in my life about it, mostly because I was worried that if I was wrong um about being non-binary and trans, that it would cause like unnecessary like conflict. And so I didn't want to like come out if I wasn't sure. I didn't think that my immediate like friends or family knew enough about being transgender to like provide that support of if I was questioning. Um so I found therapy as a way to like tell someone first in order to come out. And I think a lot of that pressure was pressure that I put on myself internally. Of course, like my family and friends love me. It's just they didn't know enough or they didn't know what to say exactly. And without that knowledge, I don't think that I would have felt like supported enough. So therapy was a good place for me to feel accepted and for my feelings to be validated, because I was struggling with a lot of like self-doubt and internalized shame and transphobia. And I was wondering how my life would change, and I was really scared for how my life would change if I came out. So coming out to a therapist first and being able to work through my feelings was like essential for me. And that's one of the first things that I recommend to anyone who is struggling with their gender identity is to talk to a licensed counselor, because they understand, well, especially if they have experience with trans people or with LGBT people, they understand what it's like and they can kind of help you through those feelings and determine what's the best route for you. Because everyone's identity is a little different, everyone's experience is a little different. And if you're trans, your transition can look way different, um, depending on the person. So that's why counseling is so important, because there are all these little decisions and steps that a queer person has to go through. Each time they come out to someone is extremely stressful. So having a counselor or therapist in their corner to support them as they come out to people is awesome. Um, Having a counselor or therapist like work through like, are you going to start hormones, or is surgery the right thing for you? Those are all really good ways for you to talk through that and to figure out what you really want. So I've since seen two other counselors, and I'm currently seeing one who out of the three has like the most experience with LGBT people. It's but it's definitely something that I would love to see expanded access to and expanded training on. Um, I think that in the United States, at least with our healthcare system and our insurance and all of that, depending on where you live, it can be really difficult to find therapy that you can afford that is offered by a licensed counselor who has experience with the LGBT community. Hi, Dylan. Um, so I would love to see more people be trained on that, and for mental health to become less stigmatized, and for especially for queer people, like because we experience um, poverty and homelessness and a lot of adverse effects like at a higher rate than other communities. I think that it would just be awesome to better serve this community more, because it's definitely an underserved community and mental health is a big part of that.
Can you talk a little bit about the moment where tell us about the actual diagnosis and how the moment in time when those two words came out, and what you thought and felt about all of it.
Um, I have because I'm pansexual. I have
Can you
And
tell,
I've like,
well, before you go on, describe what pansexual is.
yeah, well, so in my opinion, like, or at least for me, I sometimes use bisexual as a way to explain my sexual orientation to people who might not necessarily be familiar with the word pansexual. They're very similar. Really, the root of the words like are just slightly different. So bisexual, bi means two. So in the gender binary, we have man and woman, and that's kind of where that comes from. But bisexual doesn't necessarily mean that you're just attracted to men or women. You can, like, my definition of it at least is that you're attracted to more than one gender, two or more genders. And pansexual, pan means all, as its etymology. So pansexual pretty much means that gender, like, no matter the gender of a person, you could be attracted to them regardless. So they're very, very similar, and there's a lot of history behind both words. It's a really niche topic, I think, in the LGBT community, and everyone has the right to choose whatever label is most comfortable for them. I think that my orientation is most accurately described by the word pansexual, but I'm also completely fine using bisexual, especially in order to help people better understand me if they're not familiar with the terms. But so getting back to your other question, because I came out as bi and I like handled my sexual orientation first, I think that that coming out experience, like, I can compare that to my coming out experience as trans. And I was really scared to come out as bi slash pansexual, basically to tell people that I liked girls. That, like, I had a lot of internalized like homophobia that I had to work through. So I was really scared, but that doesn't really hold a candle to how scared I was when I was like ready to come out as trans. When I was ready to come out as trans, I was really, really scared. And especially in like my lowest points, when I was like doubting myself all the time, like thinking that something must be wrong with me, that I could not be trans and realize it at this age, which is crazy to think back on. But that's kind of what I was thinking at the time. I had all of these inner doubts. So it was like really tough until I started to come out. And I just remember sitting in my therapist's office for the intake. It was my first time ever going to therapy. And I hadn't told anyone else in my life the real reason why I was there. But I had to tell her in that moment, like, I'm here because I think I'm transgender, because I'm non-binary. And I just like started like crying. And it wasn't even like a real therapy session, right? An intake is kind of when the therapist sits down and types in a bunch of stuff into her computer so that they can like create a treatment plan. And even though it was just an intake, I was like sobbing because I hadn't told anybody that. And it was the first time that I had gotten any sort of like external validation that I wasn't crazy, that like, yes, I could realize that I was trans at 21, and that like, that it was going to be okay eventually. And as I came out more to other people in my life, it tended to get easier and easier. I think that the nature of gender versus sexual orientation also played a role in it. Like, your sexual orientation doesn't come up in everyday conversation. It's something that I think we see as maybe a little bit more personal, at least in like Western society. We don't always talk about our sexual attractions like at work or with like our family. That's something that comes up sometimes, but like not as often as your gender. And so I was also scared that like I was going to be asking a lot more of people now. I wasn't just going to be like keeping this part of me in a little box, my sexuality. I was going to be like, telling everyone all of me is new now. Like, I have a new name, new pronouns. In everyday conversation, my gender identity like plays a role because of my pronouns and how people perceive me. So that was also a big part of it, was that coming out as trans is like, I kind of like, for me, like my sexuality was like a piece of my life and it came up sometimes, but it wasn't nearly as big as coming out as trans. And that's why it was so daunting.
Do you remember when you told me?
Yeah, I told you when like one night when we went to like Target or something and we got back in the car and I said, hey, I have something to tell you really quick. Yeah. And I remember what you said. And I think that I understand now where you were coming from. I don't think at the time I was quite able to understand your feelings about it, but I do now. But at the time
So what did I say?
you told me that you were afraid of that. I told you I'm non-binary, I'm transgender, and you said I was afraid of that.
Yeah, I said that that was going to be the one thing that would require some processing. I mean, deeper, more complicated processing than anything before that. So, yeah, but we've had many conversations since then, and which is, one of the reason why I also do this is because I want everyone to understand that it is a process. I mean, I'm still processing. When I talk about, I still struggle with the name, I mean, obviously I use your new name. I struggle with the pronouns. I've had this to create this whole new vocabulary to talk about my children. It can't be my daughters. It's children. I'll say, sometimes to avoid using the pronouns they, them, theirs, because someone who is unfamiliar with all of this is going to say, well, they, so I'll just use the name Jude. So there's a little bit of a thinking that it takes place before I speak of you. But I, I don't know. We'll talk about later about like, the whole journey thing. I want you to go a little bit into the history of the LGBT community and, gay liberation. And I mean, I know it's a very broad subject. If there's anything that you can talk about that is like locally pertinent, do that.
Oh, um if you have not uh if you have not participated in Virtual Pride AZ before, this new group sort of came out of the COVID pandemic called Virtual Pride Arizona, and they have like an Instagram and Facebook. They do this like third Saturdays every month since April in order to celebrate Pride. And they've been continuing to do it throughout COVID in order to keep like the LGBT community connected in our state. So if you have not heard of them before, David Boyles is fantastic. He's the one that organizes the third Saturdays every month. You can join in and watch some of the different live streams. There's different groups and people that will stream all throughout the day. Or if you are interested in participating in it, you could even like schedule your own stream as a part of Third Saturday if you reach out to David. I did a part of it in September for like Suicide Prevention Month and mental health awareness. So I talked about gender dysphoria. If you haven't seen that video, you can go to my channel and check out the gender dysphoria live stream. There's a recording there of it if you haven't seen it already. But that's a great way to stay connected. And then Marshall, the hip historian, is always a part of the third Saturdays. And he's great because he focuses on like Arizona history as well as like US history of like the LGBT community and gay liberation. So he always tells this really awesome story of this person named Nikolai who is buried in Arizona, and we think that he was probably trans man, but we just didn't have the words for it back then. If you'd like to hear more about that kind of stuff, you should definitely check out Marshall, the hip historian, and tune into Virtual Pride AZ.
Does he have his own like social media presence?
Yeah, he has a Facebook page.
Okay.
And that's where Marshall streams from on third Saturdays. So you should go follow him and follow Virtual AZ Pride. But so yeah, I would refer the audience to him for Arizona specific stuff. But I think one of the things that people don't necessarily realize about like gay liberation or like trans liberation or the fight for LGBTQ plus rights in our country is that it was pretty much led by Black trans women, and like people of color and like lesbians did a bunch of work to fight, you know, for better research and healthcare for when during the AIDS outbreak, for like same-sex marriage, at Stonewall, Marsha P. Johnson. Like, there's a lot of history there that people don't necessarily know. And I think if I had to highlight one group of people who really need our attention the most right now, it's Black trans women. Like, there are so many Black trans women that get murdered each year in the United States. And it just proves that racism and transphobia are still alive and well. And the people that we need to most look to for our support right now, like who we need to provide support to right now, is Black trans women. The intersection of being queer or transgender and being a person of color really makes you, unfortunately, it makes you a target in America. So yeah, in terms of highlighting our history, that's just one thing that I would like to say, because I, you know, I just graduated from college this year, and I didn't learn, I try to take advantage of as many LGBT opportunities and classes as possible, but at least in my political science degree track, I didn't really learn much about like the people of color that helped towards gay liberation. I learned about like white cis gay men pretty much. And unfortunately, like that's who we highlight, you know? So I think that we should really be focusing on like all the diverse people that have helped fight for my rights and for our rights. And I'm eternally grateful to all of those people that against all odds just kept on fighting.
Jasper.
Hi, Jasper.
Itty bitty kitty cat.
Oh, he does not want to be held right now.
He's making a lot of noise. Okay, can you and I was curious about the term passing. Exactly what does it mean, and is that something that concerns you?
Yeah, passing is a concept that has to do with trans people, and essentially it's the idea that if you're, at least if you're a binary trans person,
Okay,
maybe even if you're not a binary
explain
trans
that term.
Sure. So in the transgender community, right, or under the transgender umbrella, there's different identities. So there's people that identify within the gender binary, which is man and woman. And if you're a trans man or a trans woman, that means you are essentially transitioning from one gender in the binary to the other. So that's what I mean when I say a binary trans person. But also under the trans umbrella, you could be non-binary, and that's me. So think of it as like a big umbrella of trans, and then like smaller umbrellas underneath that. So, and actually passing is something that can concern anyone under the transgender umbrella, but it has a lot to do with the binary genders. So I think it also has to do with like having social dysphoria as well. And so to me, social dysphoria is like when someone uses the wrong pronouns for you, or you know, they misgender you, they don't recognize you as your true gender, your gender identity. And I get social dysphoria, and a lot of trans people get social dysphoria when that happens to us. And
but
so passing.
What does dysphoria feel like?
Oh, that's a whole separate question. So let me just like finish this one out. So passing is like the concept of the idea of like passing as your like gender identity, or as like what you want to be seen as in society. So basically getting gendered correctly and people assuming your pronouns. But the concept of passing relies on people making assumptions about your gender. Unfortunately, that's sort of how society works. So it's difficult to talk about because, at least in my ideal world, we would always ask each other how we identify. and go from there. And in my ideal world, we would use they, them pronouns for anyone's gender that we didn't know yet until we were informed otherwise. You actually probably already do that. All of you watching, you potentially have used they, them singular for someone that you were unsure of their gender. You just didn't realize it. So let's say that you were like, that you found someone's wallet on the street. And you said, oh, someone must have lost their wallet. You know, I better see if I can return it to them. Let's say, you know, I didn't know who your English teacher was. And I said, oh, how, you know, who's your English teacher? Do I know them? How are they doing? If I didn't know the gender of your English teacher, I wouldn't assume. I would automatically like default to a singular they, them. So that's pretty much what I'm asking people to do for me always, is just like continue that practice of it being singular for me, because I don't identify with she, her, he, him pronouns. But so back to passing, pretty much like it for me, like if I were to try to alleviate my social dysphoria, one of the things that I'm doing is I started testosterone so that I could have a more masculine body and presentation. My voice is going to get deeper, and I'm going to have other physical changes to be more masculine, and that will hopefully alleviate some social dysphoria, because people will probably start assuming that my gender is male, and that I use he, him pronouns, which are a lot less dysphoric to me. And that brings up finally the concept of dysphoria. It's really hard to describe, but the closest word I can think of, or the closest synonym I can think of, is like cognitive dissonance. Essentially, like the way that I usually describe it to people is like, let's say that all of a sudden you woke up and you looked in the mirror and you looked like you had all these physical features that like weren't there before. Let's say you're a man and all of a sudden you woke up with breasts. That would be really alarming. And dysphoria is kind of just this, like, sometimes it feels like icky or gross. And when I look at myself, I see certain aspects of me. And before I had top surgery, for example, that like my breasts were my biggest source of physical dysphoria. It would feel like it's not supposed to be there. Like it's just wrong. And dysphoria's counterpoint or opposite is euphoria. So people can also have like gender euphoria. And that is also a way to tell if you're transgender. So not everyone who's trans experiences dysphoria, but those are some really common experiences amongst trans people, is to have gender dysphoria about things that don't align, physical aspects of you or social things that happen to you that don't align with your gender identity. And euphoria is like it's a really good feeling that you would get when all of a sudden like those things are aligning. So let's say like, you know, my old name or like the pronouns that were assigned to me at birth, those made me feel icky. They were like, oh, those aren't me. Like, and especially as I came to realize my transgender identity, those things bothered me even more, which is a really common experience for trans people to start to realize that stuff and for those emotions to sort of come up to the surface. And then you're like, oh, I hate this. This is a bad feeling. But then when people gender you with your new pronouns and things that really affirm you, it feels good, and that's euphoria. And when I got top surgery, that was like the best feeling. And even now, like I can still feel this like immense joy and comfort knowing that my chest is how I always wanted it to be. And I had to go through surgery in order to get this, but like I think that's what one of the things that makes me trans. It's one of the things that how I know that this was right for me, is that there's such a good feeling whenever I look at myself in the mirror and see my chest, or I put on a t-shirt, or just kind of like feel my chest now. All of those things are like how the opposite of dysphoria, and how I know that my transition is right for me. So yeah, that's kind of like a whole just barrage of definitions, but hopefully that clears some stuff up.
So it's more, so the feeling, I mean, we all have like parts of our bodies that we don't necessarily like are really fond of, you know, but it's more than that, right?
Well, it's that, and it's a little different or more specific. So there's also something called body dysmorphia, which you can have regardless of your gender identity. And it's kind of like, it's a similar feeling. It's like when you look in the mirror and you see that part of you, you're like, oh, I like, it's a really bad feeling, right? It could cause you anxiety. It just makes you feel like that shouldn't belong there. Like,
Gotta
and so
lose
people,
weight.
it's often attributed to like differences in your weight. So,
Mm.
but body dysmorphia could be pretty much like that cognitive dissonance about your body in any way. And anyone can experience that. If you're cisgender or transgender, like whatever, you can experience body dysmorphia. Gender dysphoria
Mhm.
is like really specific to those like secondary or like primary, secondary, or like otherwise sex characteristics that we associate with gender, like in its physical form, if that makes sense. So like secondary sex characteristics could be like your breasts, or just like how your body is shaped. Like women tend to have like these wider hips and kind of like curves.
Mhm.
And I have dysphoria about that. And one of the things that testosterone will do is it will redistribute my body fat to make me look more like a man. So hopefully my like curves will be less and I'll be a little bit more like squared off with my hips and my torso. So like those things I would say are really specific to like gender dysphoria, and a cis person probably won't have to deal with that. Like cisgender women, while they might have like dysmorphia or like have certain things maybe about their breasts, for example, that they don't necessarily love, they probably don't want to chop them off, right? um, and that's something that my therapist now, my current therapist, has said to me. She said, well, you know, like I've never felt that. Like I've felt like I haven't loved all the parts of my body, and I've felt like weird about my breasts developing or different things, but I haven't felt like I wanted to get rid of them. And that's one of the things that makes you trans. So, I mean, it's different for everybody. Like you don't have to have dysphoria to be transgender. Um, but like that's been my experience with sort of like dysphoria versus like feeling good and having like euphoria when I make these changes.
Okay. Next question is, or can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts about the LGBTQ plus representation in the media?
Mm-hmm. In a sentence, I would say we need more.
Okay, how so?
So like, I think that one of the things that like made it more difficult for me to accept my identity as queer and trans was the fact that I hadn't really seen like other people represented who were queer or trans. And because like the media that I was consuming and like the communities that I was spending time in person growing up didn't really have like LGBTQ plus people in them, I didn't get any like positive exposure. So like it's I mean it's not that like the like the LGBT people were necessarily like vilified, but they were definitely othered when I was in school, and the vacuum or like lack of representation made me feel like
When you
it
say,
was like it was
when you
like a
say,
secret.
right, so when you say when you were in school, were they othered by your peers or just by society in general? I mean, what was the most noticeable for you then?
Um, by both. I think that like my classmates and any media that I was consuming like wasn't necessarily like uh correct or like positive towards like LGBTQ plus people. And mostly what I remember is like a lack of any information or representation at all.
So when you say
And
positive, what does that mean?
so
Or not
positive,
being positive?
yes, I mean, so like it without enough representation, the like default assumption is that it's bad or that you're different or weird or that there's not that many of you. if you're part of the LGBTQ plus community. And because we have so much like compulsory like compulsory like heterosexuality in our media and heteronormativity, and we don't talk about like being queer or trans like a lot. Like those kids that are growing up, they're like growing up thinking that there's only one way to be, and that if they feel different that they're weird or wrong or like crazy. And that's kind of how I felt. So it's obviously different for everyone, and you might be able to grow up like with more positive like representation now if you are exposed to that as a kid. But in Arizona, like our laws as well make it so that kids can't learn about LGBTQ things in school. So it was like 2018 when we finally repealed no, wait,
No
2019.
promo homo.
Yeah, it was like last year, right? Like
Yeah.
the last, like 2019 legislative session was when we finally repealed no promo homo. And until then, that meant that any kid growing up in Arizona was not allowed to hear a single word about the LGBTQ plus community in school. So that included sex ed, but also like literally anything. So that meant that like in school, I wasn't exposed to anything related to LGBTQ plus things because I finished K through 12 before 2019. And then, you know, in the media, on TV, or at home, it wasn't really something that we had like ever talked about. So it's like I was saying earlier, it's not necessarily like the community was vilified, at least in what, like, I didn't experience that growing up. I didn't experience like this intense like hatred. But I did experience sort of like a vacuum or a lack of representation. And that alone made me feel like I was like weird or crazy for feeling how I did and for having my sexuality and having my gender identity.
Okay, so this begs the question about, and let me just finish because I have not just a question, about the role that teachers play in making things a little bit more safe and comfortable at school, which happens to be work that GLSEN, and you can put this in the chat, the organization GLSEN Phoenix, it's a national organization and with a local chapter that was started by Dr. Madeline Edelman. She's a professor at ASU. She's also participates in some of our WebEx meetings if we ever get around to doing them correctly. And one of the things that it does is it supports GSAs, and it also provides education to administrators and staff, teachers, to help them better support any students that might be part of the community. So I was wondering, about what your experience was with some of your teachers, or was there any, or is it, in general, like what were your feelings about the whole thing?
Well, teachers, like, because of the law and because of like parents and the administration, I think that they most likely felt scared, even if they were pro LGBT and like super supportive and stuff, which I'm sure like many of my teachers were. They were probably scared for their jobs, like to say anything. And I remember like we did have a GSA at my high school. I went to Corona del Sol, but I didn't know that we had a GSA until I was done at Corona, right? Because like people are scared to promote it, and when like your peers are making fun of you and using like slurs and stuff, then you as a fellow student, if you're queer, you're looking, and in the closet you're looking at that like, well, I'm not going to come out now, like I'm not going to go to the GSA meeting because the drumline kid is going to make fun of me at the next marching band practice. Like, so that's kind of what my personal experience was like. I was like, well, I'm not coming out then if this is the environment. And I think that people were just probably scared to say anything positive because that would have subjected them to potential like harm or discrimination given the climate and the laws and the administration at the time. That being said, there are plenty of schools in the Phoenix area who like are just really accepting, and it definitely varies depending on like how strong your GSA is and what neighborhood your school is in and all of that kind of stuff. I just didn't have like, just my specific circles in school like just weren't really pro LGBT. And one of the things that I was just talking about this last night, one of the things that is really unfortunate is that some of my peers or some of the other students who were most outwardly homophobic or transphobic actually like came out later as being a part of the community. And that is a phenomenon that we call internalized homophobia and transphobia. And I think that I even did a little bit of this as well. Before like coming out as bi, I like went through a few months where I was just like kind of homophobic outwardly. Not like to a great extent, like some of the other people that I knew in school, but that definitely happens where the policing by society and your communities are so great that you internalize that policing like to your core, and then you're like dishing it out because of all of the insecurities and shame that you have. So it amplifies all of the homophobia and transphobia that you might be spreading because of all of the stuff that's going on inside of you. And if people aren't allowed to deal with that and to come out and to have support, then the inclination is to perpetuate the policing
Right.
and
Which
all
is
of
the
the
role of therapy, to create an environment where you can actually do that very thing, which is to own what your truth is and not so much perpetuate what you already have internalized, because in the end, that is what damages you the most, is your own. Okay, so but going back to the LGBT representation in the media, have you noticed any changes, even in politics, there are, I can't tell you, I think Florida was one of the last states that elected somebody who was, trans, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken. So there's a little bit, and even, in Arizona, actually, in our own legislature, we have the LGBT caucus, which happens to be made up primarily of members of the minority. They are very open, in terms of inviting anyone to attend, anyone meaning, their peers, to attend their meetings for, again, educational purposes, and which is all, I think, really important, because it is something that the whole act of sometimes having to actually how do you say that word?
Legislate.
Right. It's a hard word for me to pronounce. Protections is like incredible, but there is a step, and we're just going to keep fighting for such things. But I was just wondering, well, you are in some ways becoming part of the LGBTQ plus representation that you felt was lacking years ago. You are very open about your story. Anybody that goes on your YouTube channel can see everything there is to see about Jude, for the most part, right? And can you tell me why you choose to do it that way? Be really open. I agree, but
I was debating, so like I hadn't really thought much about like if I was going to share like my more than just my identity, like more than just like, okay, I'm trans, non-binary, these are my pronouns, bi. Like see you later. I knew that I wanted to do that on social media just so that I could get the recognition and the pronouns and everything that I needed, and to like change my name and everything and tell people that. But after that, it was definitely something that I contemplated a lot if I was going to continue to share my story, like after that initial social media post about being trans. Because I knew that I wanted to request that of everyone, that they use my new name and pronouns and come out to everybody publicly like that. But beyond that, I wasn't sure if I was going to share my transition. And that's something that I decided to do ultimately for anyone else who's in the LGBTQ plus community who might benefit from seeing me online. And that was it. So like I'm happy that tons of people have learned from my experience, who are like allies, who are like cis or straight, like whatever your identity, like I'm happy that you're learning from me posting. But I'm really doing this for anyone else who's like me, because I felt the most alone when I thought that that there was no one else like me. And I want people to know that you can realize that you're trans at any time, at any age, at any point, that being non-binary isn't just a phase, that, you're valid. That's pretty much what I like wanted to spread as a message, and to like share my story for those people. It turns out that there's a bunch of like allies and cis people that are learning a ton from it, and it makes me super happy. And when I get those messages, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. But really, I live for like the messages that I get from other people who are non-binary or trans, or who are like just starting to think about like their gender identity, and they are asking me questions and stuff like that. That is like who I'm really doing this for, and why I decided to keep sharing my story and start talking about this on YouTube. So I'm still like documenting my transition. Like I made a vlog about top surgery and my results like 8 months post-op. I'm making videos now and recording my process with testosterone, which is just beginning, but I will be like sharing those updates online eventually. And I just like really want to keep recording for other trans people and other queer people. That's pretty much why I'm doing this.
I mean, one of the things that I enjoyed doing, which to me was really important to do, it was when we went to San Diego for your surgery, and I asked, can I document this? And you said yes, and there were some rules that sometimes I broke, but it's there. It's for anyone that wants to go read about the perspective of a parent. And because I was supportive of you, I was wondering, if you can talk a little bit about how we can support LGBTQ plus youth. Oftentimes, they're not getting support at home. So, and it just makes the whole journey much more difficult. And I think what I want to at least accomplish by educating the community is that you may not necessarily feel totally comfortable with what you're seeing, but do not in any way barrage anyone by being different from what you are. So at the most, some plain decency, in allowing individuals to exist as they are. So, but anyway, how can we support youth?
I think that one of the things, it might be tempting for a family member, for parents who have a kid that's telling them like, hey, I'm queer in some way, right? Like I'm coming out. It might be like your visceral reaction, your first reaction might be like, oh, I don't know what to do. This is different.
I've done that a little bit.
And if you can help it, like to the best of your ability, if you can help it, like try to be super supportive in the moment. And as a parent, I think one of the most difficult things, but one of the most necessary things to do is to like recognize that what the kid is feeling and to do what's best for the kid.
That's not always easy to do.
I know it's one of the most difficult things that a parent like has
because
to
you're
do,
so
but
involved with your own,
yeah, but stuff. It is, but I think it's really necessary, and whatever you can provide to the kid in the moment in the form of support and acceptance. Yep. Breathe. And honestly, just listen. If they are coming to you and saying this thing, it's immensely scary, right? Because you love them and they love you and they want you to accept them. So it's the most scary thing to come out to like your parents or your guardian, to your family members that you're really close with, because like you're afraid of rejection as a queer person. So in the moment, if you can provide support and just say things like, I love you no matter what, like you're so brave for telling me, thank you for telling me, we're going to figure this out together. Especially like if they're quite young, if they're maybe like like preteen, I guess, or younger, like that doesn't necessarily mean much for them right now as well. So just take a step back, like recognize that like even if the kid is trans, right, there's so much time that you have to like figure out what to do and to learn more. And the like right-wing media likes to portray this crisis with trans youth as like we're putting, we're injecting hormones into like little kids and all this stuff. It's just not true. It's false. Do your research and recognize that we provide gradual support to youth who are queer and who are trans, and there's no immediate like crazy irreversible medical steps that happen if you're young. There's so much that comes before that, and you're just at the beginning stages. So just, you know, take a breath and just say the things that are most helpful, that you love the kid, that you will love them no matter what, that they're super brave for telling you, and then you can figure out all of the rest, you know.
So,
Unfortunately, sorry.
no, I was going to say, you know, one of the things that I did was I was fortunate enough to, because I was already doing volunteer work for GLSEN, to have met two individuals that run an organization called AZ Typo. They're really made up of parents of trans youth. And I was told about a support group that they were running, and I went to one meeting and I met Tammy, whom I admire immensely. And I I remember I was there. I mean, and most parents that were there were parents of youth that were younger than you, because you were already a young adult because you were over 18. But I remember, you know, thinking, okay, great. I mean, I am familiar with support groups, so I mean, it's like I've been part of them before. And I said, you know, I always like to know that there are resources kind of like on the periphery. Should I need them, I can just go get one, you know. And I just decided at one time that I needed to actually do this processing on my own. I didn't, it was, I heard stories from everyone, and they seem to have been at a point where they were slightly more advanced in the process of accepting it than I was, because I went, I think, like 2 days or 3 days before you told me. And but I've always known, and there are many other groups, and I'm just mentioning, you know, these two right now because they're applicable to youth. I mean, there's other many groups that are supporting the community, and we can interview somebody from that represents them later. But it was really good. I think maybe one of the ones that I want to mention, because again, the New York with Youth is 1 in 10. I can't tell you enough about, you know, specifically what they do. I know that I visited one of I think it's probably closed now because of COVID. I'm not sure, but there's a center that they have in Phoenix, and it was the most amazing place. And so, you know, and there's all kinds of things that they do for youth there, and they're trying to open satellite locations, and I believe Chandler was one of them. It's I don't know enough about where it is exactly. I think maybe Tyler knows more about that. But that is something that we as a community in Chandler can probably, ow, I'm sorry, this cat just bit me. That we can actually provide, you know, more support for youth that, you know, need it and are not getting it at home.
Yeah. And I think that that was what I was going to say, is that, like, unfortunately not all families are accepting, or not all parents are. So and it shouldn't, and even if you are accepting, like, it shouldn't just be up to parents to provide that support, right? Like, we should be trying to tackle this on many fronts. So with community centers, like you were mentioning, and groups like that, with support groups for the youth and for LGBT adults and for parents of these people and friends and allies, we should be working towards, you know, like, public policy and legislation to protect LGBT people. And that's like, that kind of brings us full circle back to Chandler Pride. So it's kind of the mission of this group that we're starting, to connect LGBT people in Chandler, to connect allies, to educate, and hopefully influence policy at the city level, at the state level, to make this community more friendly and more accepting for LGBTQ plus people. And that's why I'm really happy to be interviewed by you for this Chandler Pride Project. I sent out the link in the chat for the YouTube Pride channel. If you're watching this live, please go click on it. The link is in the description of this video as well. Please share this with your friends, with your family, especially if you live in Arizona or the Chandler area. But we want to welcome anyone who wants to learn more to this channel and to this community. Follow us on Instagram at Chandler Pride 20. And look out for more video interviews to come as a part of the Chandler Pride Project. Thanks for having me.
So I just wanted to, before we finish,
Mhm.
I just noticed I'm a Toastmaster and I just did something I'm not supposed to do, which is I did it again. Can you just give like the community some ideas of what an ally would be doing right now to support you or someone in the
Yeah.
community?
If you want to be a better ally to the LGBTQ plus community, try to do your own research. I mean, that's why I make these videos, in order to provide like some information to people. Um, there's like a plethora of stuff online. So if you just start learning, like try to make sure that you're learning from like sources within the community, but listen to our voices, see how you can lift us up, share stuff on social media, donate to these organizations. And if you feel inclined, maybe volunteer or join one, come to meetings. If you have anyone in your life who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community, you could ask them personally how you could be a better ally to them, and if there's anything that they need. I love getting to talk about this stuff with my friends, and even my friends who have like been along this journey with me this whole time, they still tell me that they learn stuff like every time we talk about this. So there's always new stuff to learn and always better ways that you could be supporting us. So honestly, do your own research and then ask those people in your life if they're comfortable sharing some ways that you could be more supportive.
Okay, so in closure, can you share with us a little bit about, your relationship, I guess in particular, maybe with me, but your family, and how we have helped you or failed to help you, or generally what the process has been like in terms of providing support to you.
I think that now that it's been almost 2 years since I came out as non-binary, I would say that all the people in my life who are close to me are super supportive, and they've learned a lot. I can see how far they've come, and I'm really proud of you and of our family and all of my friends for learning so much so fast. My partner as well, for learning so much so fast. I came out to her, and within 3 days, she was like pretty much an expert on trans things. It was crazy. So I'm so proud of everybody for coming so far. That being said, I was like the first, I think I was the first like non-binary and trans person that all of you had met or had like, and the first time that you'd really learned like in depth about it. So there was a learning curve. And I think that's where your initial reaction came from, was that I was telling you that I was different than a lot of people that you are, and like pretty much everybody that you'd ever met before. And you didn't really know how to support me. And you were scared that I was going to have a worse or different life because of it. And that was pretty much why you said that you were afraid when I came out as trans. But now I think you've learned and you've seen that it was actually better for me to come out and live this way, and that my life is full of joy, that it's going to be okay. And you've become like one of the best allies in terms of advocating for policy and learning so fast and trying to like better the community that I live in order for me to have a better life. That is one of the immense ways that I'm so proud of you. I think we still have to do some work in like learning what to say, or like what the emotional support a like trans or queer person might need. But like those things can also come with time. But like I was saying before, if someone comes out to you, you could just say, thank you for telling me this. I think that was really brave of you. I love you no matter what. And it's fine. That, I mean, it's not something that you might like ever learn anywhere else, but those at least for me are the words that I love to hear whenever I come out and when I have come out.
Yeah,
And
I like I like to when I'm having conversations with people about anything, I like to use the spectrum, to like pinpoint, where on the spectrum things are and so on. And so for me, I look at, I grew up in a binary world. You're either girl or boy, I mean, very much, girls can't do this, can only do this kind of a thing. And then what I find myself doing is, even as I was like looking at you, I was really happy to have, this is just for me. I mean, I don't mean to offend in any way, but I was happy to have raised a really strong, smart, capable girl, right? Because I hadn't been allowed to be that. And so I wanted to offer the gift. What was really interesting for me was to, even visually, because I'm a very visual person, is to be able to say all those things that I have, helped you somehow develop, because I was providing some support or some guidance, whatever, they're all still there. And it's just a matter of, visually making some tweaks in how I see the whole picture. Yes, there's still fear about like your safety and safety of people, that are like you. And this is why I do what I do. Like I want to, if, as much as I can, I want to spend the rest of my life, really. I don't want things. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make a difference, and for the very least, at the very least, to make sure that they're safe, and that there are protections, and that they can be employed, and that they can, thrive and be super successful individuals, just like you would if you were like cis, like me, right? And it's still ongoing. But I can tell you this much, like, and I sometimes feel kind of awkward about saying I'm an ally, because I'm not sure exactly what somebody in the community wants from me. I mean, I don't, I always feel that I have more value if I've experienced what you have experienced, and I obviously have not. But, I humbly want to be available to provide support in some way, really. And I don't want to pretend I know anything more. I'm just want to be able to provide support. So like
That
Jude said a minute
exact.
ago, is there's all kinds of ways in which you can do that.
Mhm.
Donating, learning about organizations, making sure that, in your immediate neighborhoods, if you know anyone, if you know of a family, that you make sure that they're doing okay, that you're providing them, with kind words of understanding. I mean, I had my neighbors do that for me, and to me it was emotional and important, because they had seen you grow up as Julia, right? And now you are different, and it was really, really important. I remember Martha Luce and Marissa, and Eric, basically the words that they shared with me about how it was really okay, and you want that for you and for your child. So I'm grateful for their kind words. Is there anything? The
Well,
cat keeps moving around.
what you said about well, I think it's okay for you to call yourself an ally, first of all. But the reasons why you like are trying to just humbly sort of support, and like why you want to like take a back seat and just sort of lift up people, that's exactly what makes you an ally. That sentiment, that feeling that like you haven't experienced what we have, but you want to provide support, is exactly what makes you a good ally. And anyone who tries to, who is cis or straight, that pretends to like know exactly what we've been through is lying. But like if you acknowledge that and you say, okay, well, I'm not you, but I can be here to help in whatever way you ask, that is what makes you a good ally. And when you step in, when we ask, and when you ask us how to best provide support, those are all of the great ways that you could be a good ally. um I also like thought about what you were saying about how like, all of those things that you imparted upon me, like being a feminist, and all of these other like really core values that I was raised with, because you taught me to be this way. That speaks to the heart of like, kind of, when I first came out, I was kind of sad that like it seemed like you and like some of my and some of our other family members, like that you were scared that I was going to be a different person. That you were kind of under this impression that I was going to change like fundamentally. And really like how I always saw it, and how you eventually came to see it, was that I was just sort of like changing certain aspects of my appearance, or like meaningful things like my name and stuff. But but like the core of who I am, like my essence or my personhood is still like pretty much how I've always been. I'm just like changing a few things so that I can feel more comfy. And I remember Ellie like had a difficult time when I first came out understanding what my identities were and what the changes I was going to go through and
Who
stuff
is
like that.
Ellie?
Ellie's my little sister. Hi, Ellie. But Ellie, when I told Ellie that I was going to start taking testosterone recently, like a couple of months ago, when I told her that, she said the nicest things to me, and she basically said exactly that. She said, "Congratulations," and then she said, I think that like you are just like changing kind of who you are on the outside, but you're like you're the same person on the inside that you've always been. And if this is going to make you feel more comfortable, then who am I to stand in the way of that? And that is was an acknowledgement of how I had always felt about it, and how Ellie had reached that same point of understanding my transness as well. And it was so, so nice to hear that. So thank you for saying that, Ellie, and for learning so much. um, and I think that that might be a good place to end on, that I was the only things I really changed were like sort of these outward appearances, but I'm still the same person I've always been. I just get to like express myself a little more authentically and share that with the world. And yes, it is different, but for me, it's so much better. I feel so much more comfortable. And the best thing that anyone can do really is just sort of like celebrate that with me. I'm really just looking for people to be excited with me.
I know, one of the things that I asked for when I was documenting that part of the journey, on Instagram and Facebook, was that, I knew that it might be something uncomfortable for some of our friends, acquaintances to read, but I asked for, basically, was, you can sit here, read, learn, feel your discomfort, but what I will not allow, or basically it's really allow, is that you say anything negative about this experience. This is happening, and this is the child that I love. I am learning, and you can learn with me. But if you choose not to, then you can still watch, but you can't say anything inappropriately negative about that was not going to be acceptable. And for the most part, I didn't, it was fine.
It's a perfect ground rule to have. And I think that if anyone's going through that similar thing, like celebrate and share. If your friend or child or whomever that is queer gives you permission, share and celebrate that online and tell their story. But yeah, set those ground rules. Set the ground rules that if anyone says anything homophobic or transphobic, it's going to be shut down. And I think that that's good for any group or any boundary. I think that's a great one to set. That yeah, you can watch, you can be here. We accept like lots of different people in this space, but we do not tolerate homophobia or transphobia, and that's where we draw the line. And I've seen like, student organizations, professional organizations and teams like lay that ground rule that you are feel free to share or listen or whatever. We just don't tolerate hate.
So this has been fun. Mm-hmm. Thank you for being our first interviewee.
Thank
you. In the future, you might just be the interviewer. Thank you so much for anyone who is watching now or will watch in the future. This is partly for an audience of the future. I was talking with Jude. I said, this thing is going to be on YouTube, till the end of time. And Jude said, no, until YouTube is over, till they go away. Then it goes away with it. Anyway, I again encourage you to follow us on Instagram. Right now we have Instagram, and that is Chandler Pride 20. You can also follow the YouTube channel, and can't necessarily set a schedule in terms of like how often we'll be doing these interviews, but if you know me, you know that I am going to make it happen, and sometimes in a speedy fashion. So I already have the second one kind of planned. We're just going to like hash out kind of what it's going to look like, and then we're just going to do it again. And also, I want, before I get one last, I don't keep saying one last thing, but one very last thing, talk about your art, because what I've been doing with the Instagram posts, you know, when I'm introducing everyone who has been, you know, playing a role in our group, is using the art that you create.
I should have been more prepared for this.
I can pull it up and I can show it real quick.
Well, I'm trying to think if I have, hold on one second.
Okay. Meanwhile, I want to express gratitude to Tyler. When I approached Nikki Tapia of the city of Chandler, you know, with a desire to learn more about what the city has been doing in terms of supporting the LGBT community, LGBTQ plus, she introduced me to Tyler. I had met him once before at a one community event, and it's been really, really a lot of fun to actually work with him in setting this all. Just creating the group, and it's just exciting to see people, to work with people who are eager to actually make a difference. And love Nikki. I have to say a shout out to Nikki. She's awesome. And we're just looking to add more people to the bunch, and we're just in the process of trying to make sure that we answer all questions. You know, what our mission becomes clear. We're looking to engage businesses as well. We're trying to make sure that the businesses that actually have locations in the city of Chandler are on board, at the very least, you know, with allowing us to use their name as a supporter of our endeavor. And then maybe more, I don't know, maybe one day, you know, in the city of Chandler, we'll actually have one, we can actually be out and together in public, have an event that will be a lot of fun, and it will be just geared towards the LGBTQ plus community. So go ahead, share.
Okay, so I'm an artist and videographer, and I have been excited to participate in these like interviews with Chandler Pride, but also I made some portraits of our founders and our star members, star supporters on the Instagram. So go check out the Instagram to see some of my art. But I sell like prints that you can check out. I sent my website into the chat. It's judeschroder.com. So if you like are interested in any of like these prints that I'm making, you could buy these for $10 each. You can also purchase my zine on my website. If you are interested at all in learning about what it's like to be transgender and to get top surgery, I made a zine about it. I got top surgery almost a year ago in December of 2019. My zine is called I Just Had to Get Something Off My Chest. And you can see some like quotes and photos of the whole experience. Shout out to Mom for helping me photograph and document the whole surgery process. And you can see like what my chest looks like around 6 months post-op is when I took these photos. But I did a whole like self-portrait photo shoot. And that's what made it into the zine as well, is what my new chest looks like. And I think that this is just sort of a way for me to like share my feelings about it, to document what it was like to go through top surgery. And you can see my final chest, my final results by going to my YouTube channel, which is where we're streaming this. I have a top surgery vlog, so go check out some of my other videos and you can see what my full results look like, because I got nipple tattoos after this zine.
It's really cool.
So that zine is also available on my website. So if you have the money, please consider purchasing something, and I'll send these to you. I even do commissions. So if you want like your custom digital art, like I can make you digital art. We could talk about printing it if you really want to. I do like photo shoots if you live in the Phoenix area. So anything creative that you might need, really let me know. I even designed the logos for Chandler Pride as well, so hit me up. Thanks.
And one more organization that I want to give a shout out to is the Human Rights Campaign. It is an awesome well organized organization. And I happen to be the chairperson of the Political Action Community Engagement Committee, and we're looking for members. We will be engaging and following activity at the legislature when the new session starts. And you can, I forget, I should be more prepared with, with websites and all that stuff, but, we'll have that, maybe in the notes at some points. The HRC websites, you can donate or you can become involved. There's lots of opportunities to be involved as a volunteer. So we're gonna finish now. I love you. Thank you so much you're always fun to do stuff with. You're super smart and you just make everything just so easy, Um, I'm just struggling to figure out what to say,
That's
that you
okay.
haven't already said about like how to support, this new group, and let's make a difference in the city of Chandler, because, we love the city. We appreciate, all support that it provides its citizens, and we're looking to provide maybe a little bit of guidance in how to best actually accomplish that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's do it. Let's change Chandler.
Yes.
Have a
Bye.
great night, everyone.